Okay, fine. Good morning, ladies and gentlemen. So, yesterday was National Memorial Hyunchungil. Have we ever get outside for the vicinity of scenery and outdoor activities, sport, others? Interesting. Okay. I just prepared the final exam paper and handed over to our support team. So I prepared the two questions as announced. So you need to tame yourself to prepare for the exam. Following next week's final exam period. Then we now have a final touch on the next discussion. I regret to forgo many important topics, for example, legal education in socialist tradition and other aspects, for example, the profession, legal profession in Russia. So actually, I advise there are plenty of resources in the library for your follow-up works. Actually, it is out of the scope concerning final exam. I advise to complement this lecture to make you busy in the library on work. Must be July or August. Student enthusiasm to pursue a comparative work. In any case, so I listed the subtopics. It's actually practiced in the former Soviet Union. It is just a history in many parts, as you know in previous class and from other resources. And that is the case in judicial and quasi-judicial institutions. So we have some different names about a comrade course, for example. You know the Majestic Code. There's no details about in this class scheme, but you may know in the list the change of nomenclature. Actually, Majestic Code you have learned in this class originated from a British common law tradition. So it is a minor claim code, and in Russia, as you see, in British context, it is typically a criminal code, and I've introduced kind of actors, for example, a knight and others, actually lay persons to deal with minor offenses in a criminal context. So that modality was actually imported into a 1990s reform in Russia. So that was formed in place of pervasively, not exactly overlapped, however, in place of a comrade course. So you may have many senses from the word comrade course. It actually nuanced in dominant understanding in nexus of a communism, but the code name was changed, and actually many aspects of a substantive elements also improved or to follow the Western legal family, traditions of Western legal family. And we have other notable reforms concerning a creation of a new constitutional code. So in this light, Russia has formed in around 1990s pursued to erect some kind of a distinct points we usually encounter through the legal traditions, so constitutional code. Actually, it is independent and special code, exclusively permitted to perform the role of constitutional review. So that is exactly the case in Russia. It is assigned the principal responsibility in the constitutional scheme to conduct a final review about a potential contradiction of various ranks of norms, for example, statute or other presidential decrees, which we usually consider as lower norms in hierarchy. In this light, you have some ideas to adapt with a German constitutional code or other French concept about co-cassation and other European modality. It is also distinguishable from the unitary court system of the United States. The Supreme Court has one line of authority to deal exercise all scope of jurisdiction within the nation. That is not the case. But in similarity, you also note some difference from European modality. The constitutional code is actually lower code subject to the Supreme Court of Russia. In the context, also distinguishable from South Korea, for example, and German tradition. Actually, you can see the finality in German context about a constitutional code. That is perverted in Russian context. So Supreme Court actually garnered the old administration and the final say about their state merits. And that is also one of memoir you need to trace for understanding of the contemporary Russia and what others. The arbitrary code I have illustrated through the subtopic usually survive the reform. Actually, I have not detailed into what a investigative purpose about its true nature and elements, but in nomenclature and many arbitration scheme survive, which means some mid form of a economic character now practiced in Russia. See? And actually, I confirmed the labor codes were disintegrated so into other scheme or entirely dismantled. I'm not sure. Sorry. And military codes in my investigation have no profile in the judicial system of Russia and also. Economic cause based upon partially, but actually, as I've said, it is just a nature of institutional allocation. So a considerable portion of a substantial element may profile in varied forms into other nomenclature or some reallocation of the powers and the competence. So it is just a superstructure in the means how to say any substantial transformation could be charted. How do you agree? Interesting to have for the follow-up works advised. What is the procuracy and criminal investigation agencies? Another aspect of nomenclature interplays. So we have different terms. That is just, I suppose, kind of a translational differences I perceive, but also some substantial change could be noted in other aspects. For example, we usually use term procuracy to describe the common law prosecution authorities. The word was originated from the Roman tradition, as you see, and traced back in long centuries. But the dominant word, but now we see a prosecution general of Russia, for example, and Vietnam remains in the context of a previous term, procuracy. And many other communist countries now use prosecutor general or prosecution officers. Criminal investigative agencies. So you have ideas in comparison with the Korean case involving a prosecution office or central investigative agency is now disputed and argued to restructure, as you know. Actually executed, the plan was executed from political mobilization and also initiative on Congress, this organization. And in former Soviet Union, there are two distinct points you need to know about a preliminary inquiry and a preliminary investigation. There are separate process to respond to the criminal offenses. Actually, you have some reformed statute in Russia about the matters. For example, as I've said, Majestic is one illustration. And also, KGB, as you know, in English name, Committee for a Committee of State Security, formerly, was notably disbanded, which should be symbolic and also practically most powerful institution, and their competence is tremendous. top information agency in the world. So that is one point you need to revisit for the political transformation of Russia. And actually, KGB in institutional framework was one of a prosecution authority. So they are expected to conduct a preliminary investigation along with the prosecution offices in general and normal focus. And as of the nature of a nation, a federation, the Soviet Union, so authority of internal affairs also constitute one pillar from a triumvirate institutions in terms of a prosecution powers. And so you know the three branches expected to perform the prosecution, prosecution. So normal prosecution office and agency for internal affairs and KGB. And the notable focus needs to be shared since we now consider some contrast against liberal states. KGB usually consider to treat the political matters of a criminal case. So, what is the political nature of the crimes? There is one point which merits extent of our argument to understanding what the Russian context of preliminary investigative authorities. But you also compare in sharing about a criminal system. For example, that is pertinent also, could be shared in the context of a criminal prosecution system in Korea, for example. You may have idea in not incorrect context between a police authority of Korea and a prosecution, that a prosecution in Korea. So a preliminary inquiry largely similar to the police authority in Korea. So they have many branches charged with a criminal a preliminary inquiry in Russian terms, and their responsibility may bear some feature of a small claims court. So the responsibility is reduced to a scope of a minor offenses. In other context, they have contact in responsibility and execution of the job duty with interplay with the preliminary authorities or preliminary investigation. So we have some understanding in stages, a little concept of a hierarchy and a supervision, but not exactly come in that context. But in any case, we have we can find a similarity. For example, a maritime police, and railroad police authority. That is context you can identify it through the criminal procedure law in Korea. And each agency of preliminary inquiry has its own defined in rem as well as in personam jurisdiction. So that is in another aspect considered an independent authority to perform the statutory duty. So interdependent in one sense and intersected to get through the job duties and responsibilities. For example, what the law does not mandate a separate preliminary investigation. Agencies of preliminary inquiry are authorized to handle all phases of pretrial investigation with regard to crimes that fall within their jurisdiction. So we have formally three forms of a preliminary investigation, which is major profile of a quasi-judiciary in former Soviet, and that is not the case. That is not the case in contemporary Russian Federation. So KGB was dismantled and merged into investigative authority of Russia. And actually, in interim, you can see distinct offices as denoted in the name of investigators or prosecution offices of general. Well, how do you distinguish from those two names? Actually, I have introduced staticism now roles in Russian context. They had fear in the process of political transformation, a threat to a Soviet Union, and in a total disintegration of Russia. So that is, of course, partly from pursued by Mikhail Gorbachev, his figure to assuage the strong control of Communist Party, and may have renovate some arrangement, relaxed from orthodoxy of a Soviet Union paradigm. So it is one cause, and actually primary cause for Yeltsin to take initiative of restructuring. Now, Mikhail Gorbachev will to lead the World Political Forum, which is actually less powerful, but academically ideological to read. So he actually got powers after through. So what the policy to decentralize the Soviet Union is one reason to realize this new form of Russia. And they turn to protect their various states. They innovated actually to counter the new threat, the statism. So the context was reflected in the nomenclature. We see, of course, the KGB was dismantled, and also the name was the organization was renamed to Investigative Authority of Russia, which is fairly analogous to FBI of United States. So now many similarities to the liberalist paradigm. May I just go for one example? And also constitutional code now popularized through many European modalities, and also what the investigative authority to model after the United States. And also now Russia has a 95 federal subjects, which outnumber the states of the United States, but may get, in some sense, to be analogous. That is not. I have introduced a former Soviet Union in the context of a federalism. You have a 15 union republics, and if you are available in the map, you can see the best of the republics were located in a eastern part of Russia, and actually, politically, economically, the location you can see the central Russia. So now you have some different forms of a political creature, Russian Federation, and they now, until now, manage a commonwealth of independent states, which is a scheme to incorporate other independent nations, for example, Ukraine or Kazakhstan and others. Actually, they are by no means constituent a nation of Russia, but they have a loose form of inter-organization in extent and a practice of integration. It may be comparable to commonwealth of nations now managed by Britain, but by no means comparable to supranational institutions, for example, European Union. So its extent of integrity is rather loose, and also you can have a comparison with a federation or confederation. You may find the confederacy in the United States context, around the independence ages, confederacy or confederation, and they are more strongly affiliated organization. So now Russian Federation are virtually analogous to United States in extent, but I have described many differences through the previous class about its similarity. So I now work to get through some more vital point in lesson, as it's just the history cases. So what is that? And they have juvenile calls. Communal calls. I actually instructive to have ideas about communism. The function of communal call roughly corresponds to that of a small claims code in the United States. But in addition to providing a forum for the resolution of minor legal disputes, it also serves as a platform for training for future communist adjudicators. The third function of the code is the enforcement of the rules of communist morality in a contemporary socialist society. As a dispute resolution is only one and perhaps the least significant aspect of the communist code machinery. The notion of communist code is deeply rooted in the ideology and theology of socialist law. Soviet enthusiasm for the communist code is shared by almost all of socialist countries. Poland ranks prominently among a couple of social countries that do not have anything similar to the Soviet communist codes. Cuba at one time experimented with the tribunals populares, the counterpart of the Soviet communist codes, but abandoned the idea during the 1973 through 1974 reforms. What it described is actually a concern about a Soviet experience and may have some historical values. In Soviet thinking, it is expected that under full communism, communist codes will replace the regular codes, which will have withered away. To that effect, the communist codes of today are viewed as an understudy for the regular code, with a view to assuming the surviving functions of the regular codes. Soviet government policy at the present time is not to overly judicialize the proceedings before the communist code. Accordingly, the communist code procedure is relatively more simplified than that before the regular code. The scope of due process and protection available to defendants before the communist codes is deliberately narrower than before the regular codes. The judges who sit on the communist codes are generally persons without legal training, although in isolated cases, lawyers may serve. Then we now see the notable features of communist code. First, a communist code is a non-professional quasi-judicial tribunal staffed by neighbors and fellow workers. Branches of communist codes are set up in factories, enterprises, apartment buildings, neighborhoods, colleges and universities, collective farms, villages, as well as any other identifiable groups of citizens with at least 50 adults. However, the individual instances may differ, and in the second aspect, because communist code proceedings are deemed to be of a non-criminal nature, they can not hand down a criminal punishment. Thus, a person who has been sentenced by communist code is not deemed to have a criminal code. Actually, the offenses may involve a criminal context, but it is minor and treated usually in neighboring practice, you see. So no criminal code. Some of the sanctions that may be imposed by a communist code include the demand for a public apology and various forms of punishment, which is social in nature, not criminal. So they expected to be bridged in the institutional context with a general context of court. A common warning and social censure or social reprimand with or without press publication, a fine of up to 50 rubles, a recommendation of the dismissal, demotion, or transfer of an offender from a job, recommendation of eviction of an offender from a public housing project, recommendation that an official should make compensatory payment of no more than 50 loaves. Commonwealth Code may depending on the circumstances of each case, recommend a combination of any of the above sanctions. So, actually, sorry to lack some extensive investigation about new reforms, but the critical assumption of comparative study has some adage about its evolution of legal institutions. So actually the reform was undertaken in extensive forms in Russia. So we may have some difficulties to entirely dispense away the previous system. So some of the institutions may survive into a different structure or other context. So there's a point I now wish to make for your follow-up works. And in third point, collaboration between the Commonwealth Codes and regular codes proceeds along two levels. The Commonwealth Code may transfer any case before it to a regular code. If the Commonwealth Code feels that there are enough grounds for criminal rather than social sanctions, and the Code of Law may transfer to the Commonwealth Code any case before it. If it feels that the crime committed does not pose any serious danger or the personality of the defendant is such that it could be re-educated through social pressure. So it is may be likened to trade union context, experimental classroom of communism in fourth, members of the Commonwealth Codes are elected 2-year terms of office at general meeting of the workers' collective to be served by the court. The members are accountable and accountable to and removable by those who elected them. That comes in same point as we have said in over a general course. The size is established as a general meeting of was served by the court. Then, what is the scope of jurisdiction? It has 3 types of jurisdiction: exclusive, alternative, and transfer. So the concept and ideas are simple and also may well comparable to our intelligence, exclusive, alternative, and transfer. These concepts are often found in your a criminal procedural class. They exercise exclusive jurisdiction over those cases which are assigned to them alone. And Article 7, second of the RSFSR Criminal Code, certain cases may go either before the Commonwealth Codes or before a regular court of law. The determination whether any of these cases should go before the Commonwealth Codes or before regular court of law is on an ad hoc basis, generally by the pretrial judge of the regular court or by procurator. So the jurisdiction and a network of a criminal authority was delineated actually in a criminal code and others. And I have noted the criminal code was reformed in 1990s. The noteworthy aspect of jurisdiction of Soviet Communist Code is the issue of possible conflict of jurisdictions between different communist codes. A rural citizen is normally subject to the jurisdiction of one communist code, that of the collective farm or village where he resides. But an urban citizen may in fact be answerable to more than one communist code, one with jurisdiction over his place of residence and the other over his place of work. No rule specifically covers the conflict of jurisdiction between 2 competing communist codes. In practice, however, the workplace-based commonwealth code handles violations of labor discipline and other work-related violations, whereas its residential commonwealth code handles all the other violations, especially any involving the moral conduct of citizens unrelated to the production process. And you have some explanation about res judicata, and it is common concept shared across jurisdictions. Res judicata is one doctrine you see in the civil procedure of South Korea, also incorporated into common law system in theory, and what actually applied to cases above. And parties before the Commonwealth Code enjoy some measure of due process of law. It is interesting. We have the concept of due process law in Commonwealth Code, but actually, in varied form of due process can be charted through each issue. And for example, right of counsel was not afforded to the case of a Commonwealth Code. However, right of confrontation or the doctrine against self-incrimination, for example, was honored by a Commonwealth Code. And notably, it is interesting to see the protection against double jeopardy. So it is a point to enable the Western, communist legal system as one of Western legal family. Double jeopardy principle is important. A Commonwealth Code may not subject anyone to further sanction for conduct for which a defendant has already been placed in jeopardy by a regular code. And other element concerning due process concept may go with the right of defendant to be informed of charges against him, and to be present at one's trial, and to present evidence in one's defense. So they have equal standing in a substantial context against prosecution, to confront one's accusers. And many concepts were incorporated in modern constitutions of nations, and also practice. And to trial by an impartial tribunal of any one. So neutrality by judges and court were ensured in that, actually. And also, it grants the parties the right to appeal. Appeals must be filed within 7 days from the time of decision, and must be made either to the Executive Committee of the appropriate legislative council or to the FGMK. Upon review of the case, the appellate organ may either vacate the decision of the Commonwealth Code and remand the case for reconsideration by the same panel of judges whose judgment was reversed, or order termination of all further proceedings. The filing of an appeal effectively suspends the execution of decision in question. The decision of Commonwealth Code is not appealable to a regular court of law. So that is one orthodoxy long practiced in Commonwealth Code. And how could we initiate actions before the Commonwealth Code? It is interesting and very separate from normal process of a criminal prosecution. For example, it was initiated by a recommendation of factory management, the local branch of trade union organization, and neighborhood committees or seminar groups in the case of colleges and universities, seminar groups may impute their classmates that it is what bourgeoisie attitudes in mind. I like to initiate actions. You would be accused in communist code, the interim context, on the basis of materials transferred to communist code by a court of law or by a procurator or agency of inquiry upon the petition of any group of citizens. So a professional aspect of a judicial legal system was actually terrorized in many senses in former Soviet Union citizens by the Communist Code itself. And we have some irrationality as intermingled with the adjudicating body and prosecution authority. They share two major powers, so could be arbitrary in theory. Actually, we do not know how exactly it performs this role. In any case brought before the Communist Court must be tried within 15 days from the time it was forced a file. So some procedural aspect we now skip to other. Most decisions of the Communist Courts are voluntarily compiled by the offender. However, if it does not do so, the Communist Court must seek the assistance either of a regular court or of the management of the enterprise where the person works. For enforcement of money judgments, the Communist Court goes to People's District Court for writ of execution to be executed by a sheriff. So some institutional cooperation was incorporated in the criminal scheme, as you see. So execution could be made in interplay. Yeah. If judgment calls for a reduction or the garnishment of wages, the court must turn over the transcript of the proceedings to the administrational factory or enterprise where the defendant works for enforcement, and blah, blah, blah. And we have other context of former Soviet Union of a military cause involving what I am skeptical of its is it extent? I'm not sure. It's just a piece. In many chances, it should be dismantled. I'm not, however, dubious if they just so the description of general purpose. And what are others remaining for our review, which concern the criminal investigative agencies. So as I've said, the preliminary, there are two stages importantly dealt with in our class purpose, a preliminary inquiry and a preliminary investigation. The agencies that conduct preliminary inquiry are different in most cases from those that carry out a preliminary investigation. Both stages constitute segments of the same procedural phase of the proceedings, pretrial investigation of a suspected crime. The preliminary inquiry is a preparatory procedural step, which in those cases where the law mandates the conduct of a separate preliminary investigation is antecedent to such a preliminary investigation. Where the law does not mandate a separate preliminary investigation, agencies of a preliminary inquiry are authorized to handle all phases of a the trial investigation with regard to crimes that fall within their jurisdiction. So in exclusive a sector, the authority of preliminary inquiry is omnipresent and plenary to conduct through the final result of a criminal disposition. So you can see a similar context in Korea, or 직결 심판. Now, one point of inquiry comparison for your criminal law professor. And it should be stressed that agencies of preliminary inquiry have jurisdiction to conduct the necessary preliminary inquiry in all cases in which a separate preliminary investigation is obligatory. So, since the subject matter jurisdiction of these two systems completely overlap, it would be incorrect to say that the politically less sensitive criminal cases are assigned to the agencies of preliminary investigation. Rather, it goes to a similar concept for what a institutional expediency, or what is the administrative points of a distinction in nature and a character of a job responsibility. And so primary focus and should be given in that light, I suppose. It is true, however, that the Committee on State Security acts both as an agency of preliminary inquiry and preliminary investigation for some of the most sensitive cases. So, as I've said, it is special and also very powerful police in the scheme of a national security in former Soviet Union. So they have been involved to perform the duty. And of course, I made a point about the nature of cases in organizational scheme. What is a political nature of cases, which I expected to be dealt with by KGB or others. In any case, it disappeared. Pursuant to Article 117 of the RSFSR Code of Criminal Procedure, we have a scope of agencies. As you see through a similar scope may be found in Korea, agencies of the police, commanders of military units and formations and heads of military institutions, agencies of state security, heads of correctional labor institutions. These institutions is absent in Korea in liberalist and also in liberalist states. Agencies of state fire supervision, agencies of border protection, captains of ocean-going vessels on long voyage, and heads of polo stations during periods of absence of transportation connections with the polo station. The scope of activities of the agencies of preliminary inquiry tends to vary depending on whether or not they are acting in cases in which the Code of Criminal Procedure compels conduct of preliminary investigation. In cases in which the Code calls for a mandatory preliminary investigation, it is relatively formal and to be practiced in adversarial system, I suppose. So more ordinate and intricate procedures to ensure a proper justice. The action of the agencies of preliminary inquiry is merely antecedent to that of the agencies of preliminary investigation. So you have some point between preliminary inquiry and preliminary investigation. So In other words, upon the completion of the preliminary inquiry, if indicia of crimes are established, the organs of preliminary inquiry initiate a criminal case against the suspect and take any necessary preliminary measures aimed at preserving the evidence so gathered. So one of the responsibility is to preserve the evidence, the potential to prove the alleged crime, and also may keep through the other stages, preliminary investigation, and also some, you have some ideas, a chain through the stages. Each agency of preliminary inquiry has its own defined in-lam as well as in-person jurisdiction. So it entertains some independent status in a criminal context. For example, the agencies of police have jurisdiction over a wide range of cases and over all persons not otherwise placed under the jurisdiction of other agencies of preliminary inquiry. Then, what are the agencies of preliminary investigation? It was set forth in Article 1 to 5 of the RSFSR CCP. Code of a Criminal Procedure. The CCP in this case means Code of Criminal Procedure of former Soviet Union. What are those? As I've said, a triad of institutions, a procuracy, the agencies of internal affairs, and the committees on state security, what we call KGB. Investigators of the procuracy are classified into 3 service ranks. Ordinary, senior, and investigators for special cases. Ordinary investigators are assigned to the city procuracy, and senior investigators to the procuracies at the intermediate level. So this concept penetrates through each independent context of organizations, for example. So it pertains to a procuracy, and also instituted in the Committee on State Security. The purposes of the assignment of investigators at the Agency of Internal Affairs is structured along the same lines as the procuracy. And city investigators of autonomous republics, autonomous regions, and autonomous areas. So this institution was assigned in the Union Republic, in the context of Union Republics, so undertakes the principal responsibility to ensure federalism in United States, in Soviet Union. And also in complement with other institutions. These investigators are appointed by the corresponding Minister of Internal Affairs. There are also 3 ranks of investigators within the agencies of internal affairs I've introduced. Like all the other criminal investigators, those of KGB are similarly classified. The activities of all investigators of KGB are directed by chairman of the KGB. General supervision of the activities of the KGB investigators is by the corresponding procurator. So it is institutionally responsible to the procurator. So the concept between police and prosecution authority may apply to this case. But I've said in practice, the nature of a communism focused on a political and economic may bring some of a distorted forms of interaction into play in practice. And finally, I'd like to make some point about what agencies for the registration and safekeeping of public records. So this is one of a distinctive institutions in understanding the Soviet, the communist legal tradition. So our inquiry is to be made about what state notarial offices, for example. What are those? The structure, functions, and jurisdiction of state notarial offices are quite similar in all of the socialist countries. The Soviet model, which we described below, is typical of all the other socialist systems. The Soviet notary is cast in the general mold of its continental European counterpart. But because of the extraordinary growth of notarial functions in the complex post-industrial capitalist systems of Western Europe, the Soviet notary today resembles the pre-industrial continental European notary. He nevertheless still bears remarkable similarities to his counterparts in the civil law countries. Like his French or German colleagues, he is a family counselor, a commission agent in certain commercial transactions, custodian of public records, and a certifier of certain facts of legal significance. The true continental European tradition, he operates within a territorially defined jurisdiction and is not permitted to hold any other position in addition to being a notary. Thus, unlike his American counterpart, he cannot be both a notary and an attorney at the same time. As in Germany and France, a degree in law is a prerequisite to admission as a notary. But unlike his contemporary continental European counterpart, he is not a private practitioner. He is just an ordinary civil servant. Unlike his French counterpart, he does not have a proprietary interest in his notarial commission. As such, he cannot, like the French notaire, pass on his commission by succession to his heir or sell it to a commercial buyer. In direct contrast to his European counterpart, who is a most respected, highly visible and comparatively well-paid member of his community, the Soviet notary is a humble and often a faceless guardian of routines. Since one of the major functions of Soviet notary is to notarize documents, it is necessary to point out that under Soviet law, there are essentially two types of legal documents: those that must be notarized in order to be valid, and those that are valid without notarization. Among the first category of documents are any contract of sale, exchange, or gratuitous transfer of a house or part thereof if it is situated in a city or village that enjoys the status of city, and if at least one of the parties is an individual citizen. Any donation of money in excess of 500 rubles, power of attorney relating to certain transactions, and wills. The Soviet notariate is a network of state agencies that perform notarial functions. The principal unit of the notariate is the notarial office. So you have some corresponding ideas about a Korean case, and the scope of responsibility in this aspect was now discharged in official institution by Ministry of Defense in Korea and others. The Soviet notary is overworked in comparison to his continental European counterpart. Even though the number of notarial sanctions is increasing by leaps and bounds, the number of notaries in the USSR continued to grow at a very slow rate by comparison with the population growth. not all Soviet communities are served by notarial offices. For example, it is estimated that no notarial offices exist in about half of the countries of RSFSR, and in about half of the cities subordinated to provincial subdivisions. To compensate for a short supply of notaries, Soviet law authorized agencies other than notarial offices in certain instances to perform notarial acts, executive committees of village and city councils. So actually, it is one income source. Now, some statutory forms of law office in Korea exploit. However, I see no framework actually in some context that they could do in that way. The functions of Soviet notary may be classified under four headings: certification of facts of legal significance, certification of non-contentious legal rights, performance of acts of execution in relation to certain documents, and the protection of property or evidence, and the safekeeping of public documents. A comprehensive listing of the activities of state notaries is contained in Article 10 of the 1973 Federal Statute of a Notarial. As a prelude to giving his stamp of approval to any act, the notary is required by law, inter alia, to verify the substantive capacity of the parties and the conformity of the proposed transaction with all procedural requirements. The notary must also certify the authenticity of any document that is presented to him for certification, as well as the identity of persons seeking to notarize a particular document. If the petitioner is an agent of state or social organization, the notary must verify the instrument which confers the power of attorney on him, as well as the scope of his authority. The authenticity of the signatures tended to be notarized must be verified. So many similar context of statutory duties may be found. But you need to know the lives of ordinary Soviet citizens are affected more directly by the activities of state notary than by those of any other members of a Soviet legal profession. So it is practically very powerful to interact with a Soviet citizen. To make it easy for a notary to perform his task, the 1973 statute grants full subpoena powers to the notarial office. So it is one point of distinction against the liberal practice of liberal state. We see no arrangement in this kind. Subpoena powers, any compulsory measures to direct, they're not the case. Pursuant to this authority, a notarial office may demand from any state or non-governmental organization any information or document in this. In the Soviet law, the notary serves also as a private attorney general. So it is also exclusive to the Soviet case. If in the course of its activities it discovers any violations of the law, he is obligated to report such knowledge to the appropriate authorities so that the requisite actions may be taken. However, prescribe the right to accuse in public context, in general forms. So every citizen, as a matter of a criminal procedure, has a right to accuse and report to the police or prosecution officers. It was stressed in the context of a notariate in the Soviet Union. Any refusal to perform a requested notarial act may be appealed by the aggrieved citizen or institution. All such appeals are taken to the People's District Court with jurisdiction of the place where the notarial office is located, or to the executive committee of the property, a city or village council. For each transaction carried out, a notary collects from the petitioner a notarial fee in accordance with the set tariffs. The fee is turned over to the state treasury. So one mechanism, what a quasi tax context to share by a state and notarial public notary in Russia. Because the notary is paid a fixed salary, his remuneration does not depend on the amount of money he generates by services. So with the other point of difference, a fixed salary, it implies that the institution of public notary is more strongly embedded in legal lives of Russia. And also there are other contexts we need to focus. What is that? Bureau of the Office for the Registry of Civil Acts. So it comes to be networked with a public notary in the context state. So your point of understanding needs to go in that way. So for your further research, then despite many coattails from elements of comparative study, for example, legal education and others, I now complete the scope of this term in this class. And I like to appreciate all your engagement through this term. And I pray good luck in your final exam and have a pleasant summer vacation, and expect to see you next term. Thank you for your attention. Have a good day.